Whoa! What? That's
No!
The explosion of the upper stage of Starship on June 19th, which happened during the static fire test, became the fourth setback experienced by SpaceX this year.
Oh my god. It appears there has been a
Ship
row.
36 just blew up.
This continued the string of unlucky events surrounding test launches of the highly anticipated Starship rocket, designed to bring down the cost of space access. A month before that, on May 27th, the Super Heavy booster exploded during its landing burn in the midst of Flight 9. Even earlier, on March 6, the Starship Flight 8 resulted in the explosion of the upper stage, 10 minutes into the flight. And at the beginning of the year, tourists in the Caribbean could see a kaleidoscopic collapse of the debris after the explosion of a Starship during Flight 7. On the one hand, all of those Starship tests were designed to specifically discover vulnerabilities, so in a way it is an anticipated process. But on the other hand, this chain of explosions shows that traditional rocket launches, where we basically fly uncontrolled bombs, do not feel like a technology for massive access to space required for the solar system colonization at scale. Just think of one number. During liftoff, a Starship burns over 7 metric tons of fuel per second. Any vehicle that burns 7 tons of anything in 1 second does not sound like a mass market product. And this is on top of the fact that after you finish your ride, you need over 20 days at a minimum to prepare the vehicle for the next flight. And more often the turnaround is between 30 and 60 days. And this is only for the booster part of your vehicle. Not only this technology keeps high risks and maintenance, but it also implies that further reduction of costs will likely happen by making rockets bigger and bigger, which is the opposite of a mass product, driving risks and maintenance even higher. Bottom line, the real scalable space economy will open to those who develop the different, non-rocket access to space, which will be cheaper, smaller, safer, with faster turnarounds and accessible to medium-level businesses by shifting required investments from the vehicles to the infrastructure. In our previous video, we discussed how a maglev technology called StarTram is a good and currently only viable candidate for that. This technology requires a tall mountain that can reach about 6 kilometers, with the best candidate being Equatorial Mount Chimborazo in Ecuador. For that, you will need a magnetic levitation track placed in a low-pressure tube that stretches for about 130 kilometers. Typical dimensions imply pods of about 2 meters in diameter and 12 meters in length, launched at over 8 kilometers per second. The acceleration of 30G will be too high for humans, so this solution is primarily designed for launching lots of small cargo pods. However, if this technology is combined with something like a SkyHook, it can also include human launches. A SkyHook is a long tether in space that rotates and captures pods launched from Earth, with a smaller acceleration that results in just 3G, which a normal human can sustain without special training. SkyHook helps passenger pods reach the required orbit. In doing so, SkyHook will be losing its momentum, but it can regain its momentum back by helping to bring returning pods from the orbit back to the atmosphere. Thus, the more we use it, the cheaper it becomes. Is this science fiction? Not at all. All the technologies are already available. Moreover, the land-based sibling of the low-pressure maglev solution is the hyperloop. And China is already building one, specifically indicating that if the hyperloop becomes successful, the next step will be using it for space access. This might also explain why high-speed train technology like the hyperloop is being developed by the China Aerospace Science and Industry Corporation. China got it right. The scalable space economy is not only the biggest economic prize, but it is also the boldest geopolitical idea. And starting from the hyperloop on land is the smartest way to do that. In our earlier videos, we discussed how concentrating the strategy of the Intermarium around transborder cities can achieve exactly that and unleash the new philosophy of growth for the region. Let's try to put a bit more meat on bones of this idea by understanding the Intermarian context better. To do this, we need a closer look at Europe. The foundation of economics stems from politics. The foundation of politics stems from demographics. And the foundation of demographics is often shaped by geography. Geographically, Europe is a hodgepodge of peninsulas. Well, at least what we call the western part of it. Greece is a peninsula, Italy is a peninsula, Spain and Portugal make a peninsula, Denmark is a peninsula, Sweden is a peninsula, Norway is a peninsula, the British Isles are almost a peninsula for all practical purposes. And what is a peninsula? A peninsula is an ideal geographical niche for forging of a nation. It is protected by water from 3 sides and connected to land trade routes through a defendable 4th side. True, sometimes highlanders like the Portuguese, the Scots or the Italophonic Swiss manage to resist merging into the peninsula-defined nation. But this is also a factor of their geography. This is why Europe is like no other place on the planet, often called the Peninsula of Peninsulas. And this is why it became the birthplace of nation-states. But actually it doesn't stop there. If you subtract those peninsulas, France is also kind of a peninsula, and it definitely occupies its natural geographic niche. And the first major Western country where geography becomes a bit fuzzier is Germany. It has geographically defined borders in the north, west, south and southeast, and is only the northeast border with Poland that does not have hard geographic barriers beyond some rivers. This is why historically it was way more volatile than other German borders. Now let's take a look at the east. It is very different from the west. Almost nothing occupies a natural geographic niche there. Its most prominent features are the zigzagging Carpathian Mountains, the Pannonian Plain, the valley of the Lower Danube, and the gigantic Great European Plain. The only country that is relatively well defined geographically is the Czech Republic, but the rest is all over the place. Hungary takes only a small part of the Pannonian Plain. Romania is split into 3 parts by the Carpathians. Poland is in the middle of the European superhighway and has been wildly wobbling left and right throughout its history. Ukraine is split in the middle by the major Dnieper River, while a part of it spills beyond the Carpathians. Another major river, Danube, splits Hungary. Belarus has no geographic borders whatsoever except for some marshes in the southwest. Slovakia is Intermarian highlanders. The Balkans are loosely organized across a badly defined linguistic map, and the Baltics are just there until no one touches them. This region has been the damper that absorbed everything that Eurasia threw at Europe. The Scythians, the Huns, the Avars, the Bulgars, the Magyars, the Mongols, the Ottomans, and eventually the Soviets. The powerful geopolitical storms of the giant Eurasia have been sending shockwave after shockwave, while the people of the West, like honeybees, work in their well-defined cells. And the Intermarium became a sponge that absorbed most of those shockwaves. Over time, the pressure solidified the sponge into the grid of a crystal. To compensate for the lack of well-defined geographic niches, in the modern age of nations, the Intermarians discovered a new structural glue – their nationalisms. And so we have Europe, with a bunch of nations sitting in their cells. In the west, the honeybee cells. In the east, the crystal grid cells. Some problems of Europe, like the austerity politics, hit eastern and western nations somewhat similarly. Other problems, like the migrant crisis, became a challenge largely for the west, because the east did not want to do anything about it. On the other hand, problems like the Russian threat or the dependence on the Russian energy pressured the east, while western countries cared for their own priorities in relations with Russia. These discrepancies led many to believe that the European project isn't doing that great. This culminated when Wolfgang Münchau brought to light the problem of even higher level with his powerful book Kapu. The very pillar of Europe, Germany, seems to be crumbling on the structural level. The Russian attack on Ukraine and the following American abandonment gave an electric double shock to Europe and suddenly reignited it with a new impetus. Transforming Europe into a self-sufficient military power became the new unifying idea for the bloc. In theory, it makes a lot of sense. German and French military technology, a new Ukrainian battle-hardened army, and an unprecedented upgrade of the Polish military create a powerful European combination. And this comes at the moment of a geopolitical opportunity. While North America is bickering within, Russia dragged itself into a self-defeating war with no good ending, and China is going through a demographic collapse, Europe becomes the beacon of hope for the planet. The European Commission negotiated a trade deal with Latin America, a stark contrast to trade wars that come from Washington today. Major agreements are on the way with China and India, while economic deterioration in Russia may remove it from the list of major players for years to come. Europe found itself with some really good cards on its hands, charged geopolitically, militarily, but with one major flaw. Nothing can improve its lackluster economic drive. The damning indicator of it is the number of so-called unicorns, the fast-growing major startup companies, comparing to the USA and China. Europe is embarrassingly behind. This is a sign of a much bigger systemic problem. You can see how after the 2008 economic crisis, the trajectory of the European GDP detached from the American, and now it will be lucky to hold its position against the Chinese. Out of the top 20 tech companies, only 2, and not the sexiest ones, are from Europe. This problem got exposed in the famous report on the European competitiveness by Mario Draghi, the former chair of the European Central Bank. The report drew a lot of attention by highlighting key Europe's problems, such as the deficit of innovations, over-regulation, and high costs. Unfortunately, it suggested solutions focused on simply throwing money at innovations, focusing on decarbonization and strategic autonomy, which in plain English all sound like even more costs. It is not surprising that in such an environment of financial constraints, far-right parties find a promising ground, gaining their votes at the expense of both center-right and center-left parties. The European dream of transforming into a major power stumbles into simple math that was first famously noticed by Angela Merkel. While America has 5% of the world's population and almost half of the world's military budget, Europe has 7% of the world's population and more than half of the world's social expenses. Sure, this sounds great, and as a European you definitely get used to such protection. But with these level of social costs, you can forget about the army with the global or even regional ambitions. Inside of Europe, it is the western part that has this outlandish social spending, with France, Italy and Germany being the leaders. The countries of the Intermarium, however, are in the middle of this chart, being comparable to the USA and Canada. It becomes obvious that due to its more competitive cost structure, it is the Intermarium that is destined to lead the European transformation, both militarily and in terms of innovations. We have previously argued that the main weakness of the Intermarium, its demographics driven by the labor outflow to the west, can be reversed by changing its geography using technology. Creation of the Transborder charter cities, designed to unite both the EU and non-EU parts of the Intermarium, become anchor points for the future infrastructure of a high-speed network and the magnets for the competitive, innovative workforce from all of Europe and beyond, will produce a supranational structure that does not clash with nationalist narratives, but instead complements them at a different level. Such a technological network will become the critical linchpin between Eurasia, Europe, and the Middle East that will be impossible to bypass. The old European empires aimed to control this very place for centuries, and now the time has come for the region to take the steering wheel back into its own hands. Sure, many things will need to end, like the regime in Belarus, or the war in Ukraine, or the political stagnation in Serbia. But the writing is on the wall. All of those things will evolve one way or another, and the Intermarium needs to have a strategic project ready. Let's take a closer look at those neighborhoods. The border between Belarus, Ukraine and Poland is a great place to host a transborder zone on the banks of the Bug River. Coincidentally, this very region is also the birthplace of the first Belarusian astronaut Pyotr Klimuk. The border between Ukraine, Romania and Hungary has a convenient location on the banks of the Tisa River. Again, interestingly, the Szabolcs-Szatmár-Bereg county that it borders is the birthplace of the first Hungarian astronaut Bertalan Farkas, as well as Tibor Kapu, who just launched on the SpaceX rocket within the Axiom Mission 4. And the transborder zone between Hungary, Romania and Serbia lies near the very same Tisa River in the region known for the tech hubs in Szeged, Timișoara and Novi Sad. All of those suggested hubs are conveniently located in the proximity of the existing logistics infrastructure and the airports of Brest, Satu Mare and Szeged. Our concept shows those hubs in the form of technological pyramid cities that work as linchpins for the high-speed transport network. And whether they lie in the fields of the Pannonian Plain, in the beautiful region of Banat where Hungary, Serbia and Romania have so much history, or rest in the shadows of the Carpathian Mountains at the doors of the famous Transylvania where Tisa flows between four countries, or hide its hyperloop lines among the forests and marshes of Palesia, the birthplace of Slavs surrounded by the mysterious Shatsky Lakes. These zones are meant to create a supranational network that will boldly compete for international talent and represent the face of the global technological ambition of the rising Intermarium. To achieve its success, the Intermarium needs to keep its eyes on the goal. And the ultimate goal is space. To outcompete others in space, the Intermarium needs to build its technological muscle in the areas that are currently missed by the mainstream, but which undoubtedly represent the ultimate future. And the best practical place to start with is the hyperloop, which is currently pioneered by the Dutch Hard Hyperloop, Swiss startup with Romanian roots Swisspod, and the already mentioned China Aerospace Science and Industry Corporation. The perfect logistical and geopolitical context for the hyperloop will evolve from the transborder zones that stitch the Intermarium together. In 2023, French President Emmanuel Macron declared the need for European strategic autonomy. Until the last American elections, it was largely a talking point for the European Commission without real heavy lifting behind it. However, when in 2025 it became crystal clear that America is highly likely to abandon Europe in the event of the Russian invasion of one of its eastern members, Europe started to take military autonomy very seriously, which was elevated further by the newly elected German Chancellor Friedrich Merz. But military autonomy is just the beginning. Today, in space exploration, Europe continues to follow the American lead. It doesn't really have future-proof space access infrastructure, only the French Space Center in French Guiana from 1960s. Europe does not have reusable rockets like SpaceX. Europe cannot send people into space like the Americans, Russians and Chinese. Europe is in a dire need of a strategic upgrade, but seems to be stuck with the old technologies. A good example of how a future-focused bid can help newcomers leapfrog well-established but old-school market leaders is what China did with electric vehicles, and especially the example of the BYD company. Automotive production was the pillar of economic growth in many leading countries in North America, Europe and Asia. Thus, China tried to catch up by creating domestic car production using joint ventures with existing leaders. But it soon realized that it cannot effectively compete with established players. Instead, it made a bid on electric vehicles that will be required for our picture of the future, sooner or later. Importantly, the success of Chinese EV manufacturers did not appear out of nowhere. It was preceded by several developments that laid the groundwork for it, such as the nationwide program aimed at increasing electricity generation, the growth of Chinese tech corporations that later became early investors in many of the EV companies, and advancements in high-speed rail research which expanded the School of Electric Engineers. Similarly, to lay the groundwork for the future of space access, the Intermarium must gradually master the enabling technologies and take the lead in developing solutions that others struggle to adopt because they remain heavily invested in legacy systems. Building a transborder hyperloop network that connects regional growth zones into the system that supersedes national boundaries is precisely the kind of bold move that can leapfrog the competition and position the Intermarium at the forefront of the coming space revolution. Unlike the American focus on research and exploration or the Chinese focus on geopolitical impact, the guiding star of the Intermarium has to be bigger, philosophically more ambitious and lasting. The Intermarium needs to take the lead in bringing humans and life in general to the sustainable colonization of the solar system, not just to place the flag or extract useful resources, but to evolve humanity into a solar system species. The Intermarium should usher in its own new age of the big expansion. We came to think of Earth as our homeland, from the icy deserts of Antarctica to the rainforests of Amazonia to the mountain ranges of the Himalayas. This is ours. This is where we live. This is home. The technologically advanced Intermarium will offer humanity the new growth philosophy of the big solar expansion, the big bang of humankind and the earthly life in general that will grow the measures of our homeland to the entire solar system, from the under-ice oceans of Europa that have more water than all oceans of Earth, to the gigantic glacial lake of Ligeia Mare on Titan that holds 40 times more methane than all reserves of liquid fuels on Earth, to the floating cities in the upper layers of the atmosphere of Venus where pressure and temperature allow humans to stand with minimal protection, and even to Verona Raptures, the tallest cliffs in the solar system located on one of the furthest outposts of our new solar homeland, on Miranda, one of the moons of Uranus. All of this is destined to become our new home. It may take centuries, but the moons and planets of the solar system will become our backyard. By then, even the very definition of what it means to be human may evolve, with genetic engineering adjusting our biology to suit new environments. But the path to that future begins today, It starts with the competition between Earth's major powers. In that competition, Europe must act on its own. It already has a solid foundation, but it needs a committed pioneer, an engine to drive it forward as a leader and not as a follower. The Intermarian network of growth zones with a global ambition can become that engine at a supranational level. It must develop a guiding philosophy that takes it out of its comfort zone and drives it to dominate in key relevant technologies that are difficult for others to replicate. One such technology is evacuated low-pressure maglev transport, such as the hyperloop, which the Intermarium can begin to act on today. And once this technological muscle is sufficiently built, the Intermarium will lead the world to a bold new idea of the accessible, democratic, opportunistic, scalable, and intellectually challenging big expansion, in which everyone can participate. An idea that can rally the efforts and ambitions of the Intermarians for the generations to come and ensure their growth on a cosmic scale. The big expansion is more than just a drive to space. It is a new flagpole for society that is meant to give it a higher purpose. In recent years, the main ideas that the West produced were centered around three major trends: climate change, demographic collapse, and the rise of AI, which is going to replace a lot of jobs. To be honest, the intellectual response that we received to those challenges wasn't particularly monumental. First, the fear of job replacement produced the idea of the universal basic income, with the best case for it probably made by Andrew Young, a former American presidential candidate. But early experiments with UBI did not show promising results. All of this sounds like breadcrumbs thrown to people for the jobs and self-worth that the tech bros are going to take away from them. More recently, Ezra, Klein, and Thompson put forward the idea of abundance, which was highly praised by the pundits. In a nutshell, they argue that if we remove bad regulations, then smart governments can use new technologies to build a lot of good stuff that will save us from all the bad stuff. For the Intermarians who spent a lot of time in the Soviet system, this bell sounds familiar. True, big government's infrastructural projects can make a substantial impact. But this spending alone does not produce a model that can be described by the word abundance at an individual level. Big expansion, however, is a fundamental response to where we go, why we do it, and how we get there. The role of the government is to lower barriers and create a gate that anyone can open, not just billionaires with their space toys. Where we go, we expand our habitat, which will drive demographics, knowledge, and opportunities. This is the answer to population decline and the rise of AI. Why we do it? To spread life, create wealth, and remove pressure from our home Earth. This is the answer to climate change and economic alienation. How we get there? By joining efforts to dominate in particular technologies that will give us a lasting competitive edge in space access. This is the answer to the creation of new, previously non-existing jobs and a compass to national interest in current geopolitical storms. Abundance is the argument in favor of streamlined but towering technocratic government. Big expansion is the argument in favor of millions of ordinary men and women whose pursuit of happiness can turn the solar system into a massive, lasting civilization. And the Intermarium can become the key that opens that gate. Thank you for watching this video. Please don't forget to hit like and subscribe buttons if you enjoyed it, and let us know in the comments if you think that the Intermarium can rise to face a task of that level.